The Taming of Draenor. While the spore mounts flourished, Agrimar continued his hunt for demons. His grand mission eventually took him near Draenor, a world not yet discovered by the Titans. Agrimar lingered among the vast emptiness of a Draenor, listening for the dreams of a world soul at its core. He heard none, and yet the world still intrigued him. He had never seen a place of such voracious and diverse plant life, a place of such untamed savagery. The more Agrimar observed the evergrowth, the more he foresaw doom in Draenor's future. If left unchecked, the plant life would consume everything on the world, even the elemental spirits. Once that happened, the evergrowth would devour itself. Draenor would be left a dust-blown wasteland, devoid of even the most primitive life. Though Agrimar was eager to continue his war against demons, he could not leave Draenor to such a fate. His natural affinity for order compelled him to take action. The Titan warrior did not want to exterminate Draenor's plant life. He desired only to temper it. He knew that to do so, he would need to neutralize the spore mounts. They were the heart of the evergrowth's power and the cause of its rampant expansion. Agrimar considered destroying the spore mounts himself, but his power was so great that he feared he would irreparably damage or even shatter Draenor. He also knew he could not stand guard over the world forever. Instead, he would create a mighty servant in his image to uproot the spore mounts and then maintain balance over Draenor. Agrimar swept his colossal hand over the world and wove its fire, air, earth, and water energies into a massive elemental storm. He channeled a roaring tempest into Draenor's largest mountain. The energies blasted through the crust and sent shock waves of force around the globe. Then, the mountain itself groaned to life and stood up on two colossal legs. Raw elemental power crackled over the craggy hide, crisscrossed by veins of molten stone. Agrimar named this creation Grond. He would serve as the Titan's warrior hand on Draenor. At Agrimar's command, Grond set out to divide and conquer the evergrowth. The walking mountain lumbered over the world, lakes of elemental fire trailing in his footsteps. Grond dredged out seas, carved valleys, and forged mountains to separate the evergrowth. Then he marched towards the nearest spore mound, which towered nearly as high as the giant. The spore mound's gnarled roots exploded from the earth to entangle ground and bar his way. The giant smashed through them with ease. Grond stabbed his jagged fingers into the spore mound, and then he tore it from the world's surface with a single mighty heave. The other spore mounds shivered in agony as the destruction of their kin. Mere roots and vines would not topple Grond. The spore mounds needed a new weapon. They needed to adapt. Each spore mound drained the surrounding forests and jungles of life essence, leaving behind only withered tracts of land. Infused with these energies, the spore mounds arose to walk the world. There were 3 spore mounds in total, and each embodied a different region of the evergrowth's domain. The first was called Zang. Swampy mires and mushrooms thickets glistened across its hide. The second, Botan, was covered with primal forestlands. The last of the spore mounds was known as Nanu, and it wore a fleece of dense jungle. As one of the spore mounds moved against Grond, and Draenor buckled under the weight of warring giants. The fall of Grond. From the skies over Draenor, Agrimar watched the spore mounts converge on Grond. Zang, Botan, and Nanu were determined to preserve the evergrowth at any cost. They called upon their primal fury, and they lashed Grond with tendrils hard enough to crack diamond. Massive boulders crumbled away from the elemental giant skin. The stone crashed to the ground with enough force to carve out valleys and shatter mountaintops. Through their communal sentience, the spore mounts moved in perfect unison. They nearly overwhelmed Grond, and he teetered on the verge of collapse. But it was only for a moment. Like Agramar, Grond possessed a will that was forged of steel. He would not give up until he had brought balance to Draenor. Elemental storms howled to life over Grond's body as he gathered his strength and launched himself at the spore mounts. He pummeled them with fists that carried the weight of mountains. Each blow sheared away pieces of the verdant giants. Broken roots and seed tumbled from the spore mounts and fell to the earth. Grond was relentless, but the spore mounts gave no ground. They endured the elemental giant's wrath and continued their fight for domain over the world. The tide of battle shifted between each side, and the world's crust trembled and cracked beneath their feet. Though the spore mounts were resilient, they could not hold out forever against Grond's attacks. Zang suffered most from the elemental giant. It was the smallest of the spore mounts, and the first to fall before Grond's onslaught. Grond took hold of Zang and tore the monstrous creature in half. The spore mount's shredded corpse toppled the world's surface with a deafening thunderclap. In the ages to come, the rotting body would transform into a fungal region known as the Sangar Sea. Grond pressed his attack against Nanu and crushed the other giant between his unyielding hands. The lifeless spore mount collapsed to the ground. Its broken husk would slowly sink into the earth and become a region called Tanan Jungle. 2 spore mounts had fallen to ground, but the long battle had chipped away at his mighty form. He was a shadow of his former self, riddled with cracks and fissures. Bhutan sensed its enemy weak in state, but it needed power to defeat Grond. The spore mount unleashed its dwindling life essence from the bodies of Nanu and Zang, drawing the energies into itself and growing to a monstrous size. Even with its new strength, Bhutan was cautious. It evaded Grond's direct assaults, all the while entangling its foe in thousands of small vines. The thorny tendrils coiled around Grond and gradually burrowed into the cracks and wounds on his skin. Grond considered the vines nothing more than a nuisance, and he ignored them. Yet, as the tendrils tunneled deeper and deeper, he realized the true threat they posed. By then, it was too late. The vines wrenched open Grond's existing wounds and caused new fissures to erupt across his body. The elemental giant collapsed beneath his own weight and crumbled to pieces. The bulk of his corpse formed a mountain range at the edge of the region later known as Nagrand. The blood of giants. During the battles between Grond and the spore mounts, pieces of the leviathans had fallen to the earth and given rise to new types of creatures. The seeds and roots that had tumbled from Zang, Nanu, and Bhutan contained a small portion of the life essence. Many unique beings sprouted from the plant's matter. The strongest were lumbering giants called the Janissar. A mane of thick fronds covered the skin of these 4-legged beings. Despite their enormous size, they were incredibly swift and agile. Much like the plant matter that fell from the spore mounts, the rocks that toppled from Grond stirred with life essence. The largest boulders arose as sentient beings called the Colossals. Though they were not as mighty as Grond, their shadows still loomed large over the land. Much of the stony debris that fell from Grond also contained the primordial elemental of fire, earth, air, and water. These energies gradually coalesced into pools of power, from which elemental spirits took physical shape for the first time in Draenor's history. If not for the spore mounts, this would not have been possible. They had devoured much of the fifth element, which allowed the elemental spirits to grow in power. These spirits were initially few in number, but after Grond's defeat, their population exploded. Vast quantities of elemental power had bled from his corpse, As a result, countless physical elements emerged around Ground's mountainous remains. Among them were the Furies. They were the most powerful elemental spirits on Draenor, and they dwelled near what remained of Ground's head. Their names were Incinerators, the Fury of Fire; Arboreus, the Fury of Water; Gordog, the Fury of Earth; and Calandrios, the Fury of Air. The four Furies laminated the death of Grond, and they vowed to dwell in his corpse's shadow forever. The place that these beings called home would be known by Draenor's future mortal cultures as the Throne of Elements. In Grond's shadow. When the Colossal emerged on Draenor, hope swelled in Agramar. Though the creatures were not as mighty as Grond, they were many. Agramar was confident that they could destroy Bhutan and bring balance to Draenor, but they would need his help. Agramar fashioned immense stone discs from Grond's remains and branded them with the Titan rune of power. He fused these objects onto the Colossal's craggy hides like plates of armor. The discs flooded the giants with primordial energy, enhancing their strength and resilience. The Colossal's empowerment had not come a moment too soon. With nothing to oppose them, Bhutan and the Janissar had free reign over Draenor. The Spore Mound and its followers were cultivating the Evergrowth and reclaiming territories destroyed by Grond. Before Bhutan could fully restore the Evergrowth, Agramar unleashed the Colossals. He had learned much about the Spore Mound while watching it battle Grond. He knew its strengths and its weaknesses, and he imparted this knowledge to the Colossals. Just as the Colossals began their march, Agramar sensed a faint ripple of energy cascading through the great dark beyond. Its source was unmistakable. It was the death rattle of a constellar. These celestial beings kept watch over the Titans' ordered worlds. For one of them to have perished was a dire omen. Something had vanquished the constellar. Though his work on Draenor was far from over, Agramar could not stay. He needed to find out what had killed the constellar and whether the nearby world was in danger. Agramar charged the Colossals with defeating the Evergrowth in his absence. He bade them farewell, vowing he would return one day. Then he launched himself into the stars. He would never see Draenor again.